Hello, I'm Johnny Overcast, Director of Government Sales for Samsung. Tell you a little story about this morning. In my zeal to get my car and hit the traffic, I left my suit jacket. So Randy let me borrow his, and it fits quite nice, I think. So I might keep it. So we now have the honor of hearing from Rear Admiral David Simpson. Before I go into an introduction, though, I'd like to say for you to send forward questions, please send them to questions@dc.afcea, AFCEA, So, and it is with a great honor to introduce Rear Admiral David Simpson, who's appointed Chief of the Federal Communications Commission Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau in November 2013. As Bureau Chief, he oversees public safety, Homeland Security, emergency management, cybersecurity, and disaster preparedness activities at the FCC. He works with public and private partners and through the rulemaking process to deliver state-of-the-art communications that are accessible, reliable, resilient, and secure, and to help ensure that communications networks meet the public safety needs of Americans during emergencies. He brings to the role more than 20 years of information and communications technology experience supporting the Department of Defense, working closely with other agencies to provide secure communication services and improve cyber defense readiness. Admiral Simpson served previously as the Vice Director of the Defense Information Services Agency. In that capacity, he helped lead an organization responsible for planning, developing, and providing interoperable global communications for the defense community. It was my pleasure to meet Admiral Simpson a couple years ago, and so I please invite you to welcome Rear Admiral David Simpson.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Well, it's great to be here, and thanks to all of you that braved the snow and the ice to be here today. I do want to comment on the jacket you were wearing. I saw that you had the Marine Corps logo there. So Randy, hoorah! Thanks for lending that. I would like to jump right into the topic today and have some time for questions at the end. The Federal Communications Commission is the primary government agency tasked with ensuring that our nation's telecommunications networks are accessible, reliable, resilient, and secure. Maximizing the benefits of communications technology is an integral part of the mission. We're focused on facilitating technological innovation, encouraging investment and economic growth, and ensuring that our networks meet the needs of the American public. The FCC must also ensure that these telecommunications networks are secure. And in this day and age, that means strong cybersecurity policies and protections. We're moving toward a time when everything is connected, and strong cybersecurity is crucial to maintaining the reliability and resiliency of our nation's telecommunications at every level. And when I say strong communications, I think it's really important to say strong and usable communications. And as we look forward, we really need to think about optimal strength. You don't want the strength of cybersecurity for all the kinds of services to necessarily slow down a new kind of application. So balance is very important as we go forward and look at new and imaginative uses of communications. Over the past decade, the evolution of the internet and the expansion of broadband infrastructure have transformed the way society accesses information today. Wireless services and technologies have dramatically evolved while shaping our economy and society. We've moved from analog to digital, from voice-only services to wireless broadband, from 2G to 4G and beyond. Throughout the evolution, the Commission has fostered policies promoting wireless deployment and innovation. We have seen extraordinary growth in the demand for wireless services. We've made additional spectrum available, but also pursued a flexible use regulatory strategy that allows providers to use spectrum resources to meet their needs and to develop and deploy innovative technologies without Commission approval, of course, with necessary competition safeguards. It's an important thing. That's kind of regulator doublespeak. What that means is we have a bias towards innovation. We feel that the flexible use regulatory strategy is the right approach to ensure that in our zeal to address things like cybersecurity, we're not eliminating on-ramps to new imaginative kinds of capabilities. Technological innovation both supports and stretches the boundaries of flexible use policies, allowing more and more uses and users to coexist. 5G systems are the next step in the evolution of mobile communication. This is true of so-called 5G technologies, enabling higher spectrum bands for mobility than previously thought possible. These higher frequency bands are currently allocated for a variety of uses, including fixed, mobile, and satellite. It is because of the success of flexible use policies that helped the United States become a leader in LTE that we intend to build our 5G policies on the bedrock of flexible use. 5G may mean not only better broadband, but also services and applications fundamentally different from those that are possible today, including services not yet even imagined and potentially entire new industries. 5G is not defined, but it is expected to facilitate very dense deployments of wireless communication links to connect over 7 trillion wireless devices, serving over 7 billion people. So think about it, 7 billion people, 7 trillion devices. That's the Internet of Things. It's a scale that is really hard to completely get your head around, but it's what we're working to enable. Part of this excitement is driven by 5G's expected ability to support a highly diverse range of new applications, user requirements, and connected devices, including smartphones, tablets, sensors, robotics, smart cities, industrial automation, connected vehicles, wireless control and automation, and I sure hope sensors within roadways that can get the salt down on roadways in time for major snow events. But it's that kind of wide range of uses of things that can now be efficiently connected via wireless technologies that begin to become possible when we bring that additional spectrum set of resources into the wireless domain. The 5G protocols are not yet defined, but they are expected to facilitate the very dense deployments. And additionally, some mission-critical services are anticipated to become feasible natively on 5G infrastructure, thanks to the unprecedented performance that will be achievable on demand. 5G will allow critical services such as public safety, which were previously handled only by specific networks for reliability reasons, to operate on public commercial networks. It will also allow for new services requiring extremely low latency. All of these services and more will be realized by the continued development of a number of existing wireless technologies like LTE and new radio access technologies as we move into 5G. Now, public safety communicators are by nature a very risk-averse lot. So it's going to be extremely important that as we move forward in 5G, we recognize that wide range of use cases for 5G and think about terms like the segregation of risk in the protocol stage. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we want to think about a number of cases from the public safety example all the way over to a new kind of game or something that would be made possible in ensuring that we've got protocols that are flexible enough to ensure that those things can coexist on that single protocol covering so many different bands. The FCC is working to foster an environment in which these new technologies can grow and flourish, and through which the United States can maintain its world leadership role in wireless. We took the first step towards this goal in the fall of 2014 when we adopted a notice of inquiry. That's, again, a regulatory speak, but we call them NOIs, asking about expanded wireless use of higher frequency bands. In October 2015, the Commission followed up on that NOI with a notice of proposed rulemaking. An NPRM is that ready, set, go item where before we actually get to publishing a rule or an order, we put out for public comment proposed rules. We ask additional questions that seek to fill the record in so that when we get ready to go to a rule, we have the best benefit of that multi-stakeholder input on establishing a rule that applies to industry, but is oriented towards ensuring that consumers' needs are addressed, that public safety is addressed, that competition is built in, and that the services are universal and support Americans all across the country. So the NPRM would create new service rules, proposes rulemaking that would create new service rules for wireless broadband access in the millimeter wave bands, and more specifically in the 28, 37, 39, and 64 to 71 gigahertz bands. Think about those bands. Why haven't we used those bands already? This audience knows, right? You can't get that past a wall. The propagation characteristics of those higher frequencies really lend them just to line of sight. And if you have that in any kind of interesting urban morphology, you get lots of multipath. It hasn't been useful before. But what's happened in wireless, right? We've gotten to smaller and smaller cells as the demand for wireless capabilities has increased. There has really been a technical reason why we would want to have smaller cells to get spectrum reuse and to get as much through picocells and nanocells and other kinds of antenna distribution systems. So what was at one time a real inhibitor for those higher frequencies, hey, you can't get it past the walls of a building, and increasingly in the future it becomes an advantage because the wall will stop it. You could reuse it again beyond the wall. And additionally, we've had significant progress in computing power. And it was great to be introduced by Samsung. Look what a smartphone has in the way of computing power today versus what a flip phone had in the last generation, versus what a computer that supported an entire company would have had 20 years ago. It's phenomenal. So that problem of multipath is now something that actually can be solved, and we're able to pull out the right intelligible signal in the future with those higher frequencies. The proposed new service rules are part of the Commission's ongoing effort to develop a regulatory framework that will pave the way for 5G. The NPRM seeks extensive comment on the service, licensing, security, and other technical rules for facilitating flexible use in these millimeter wave bands. It proposes a mix of licensed and unlicensed use in the millimeter wave spectrum and creates opportunities for sharing among different kinds of users: fixed and mobile, federal, non-federal, terrestrial and satellite, and carrier networks and private networks. Spectrum reallocation is costly and time-consuming, so we must find ways to make more efficient use of the available spectrum. This defense crowd here, the DoD and the other federal agencies, are really breaking new trail in spectrum sharing and figuring out how to get more out of that fixed spectrum resource. So this is all part of the building block kinds of activities that we think are so important for 5G. We must develop advanced spectrum sharing techniques and continue to encourage efficient use of the spectrum. Comments on these proposals are due to the Commission by January 26th, and reply comments based on that first round of comments are due by February 23rd. And I encourage you all to read the important document. The NPRM isn't that long. It's called Spectrum Horizons, or excuse me, Spectrum Frontiers, really that's the beauty of the process that regulators in our country use. We will take input from any interested stakeholder and ensure that that's factored into the decisions we make regarding the rules. We find ourselves at the beginning of a new evolution in that wireless technology with the potential for the enormous economic and social benefits we talked about. And it's an opportunity now to create a framework for building in security from the beginning. We haven't done that always within our wireless communication protocols. at least not beyond just the needs of the providers themselves. When we discuss the enthusiasm surrounding 5G and the multitude of possibilities that will open up with the advent of the new technology, we must as a community anticipate and protect against the potential vulnerabilities. One of the key challenges facing 5G is to support that wide spectrum of distinctly different use cases and user requirements in an agile, reliable, and secure manner. The control plane, think about the multipath and the need to shift frequencies around in a very flexible way in and around different morphologies. That control plane becomes even more important than it is in today's wireless networks. So with that increased need for a smart, complex control plane, that exposes it to significant risk. And it'll be our objective to have those security issues around defense of the control plane identified and addressed during the development and design of 5G technologies and systems. We think by highlighting the importance of security in 5G networks and devices will effectively contribute to the safety of our larger mobile ecosystem. As security features for 5G are developed, we should also include protocols and forward-looking solutions for devices and networks that are being designed specifically to take advantage of advanced 5G technologies. So specifically, we're not just talking, let's secure the control plane. Let's think about designing the protocol from the beginning so farther on up the stack, devices at the edge can draw security value from the 5G transport itself. We think that's really critical as we go forward, as we look at the need to have multiple use examples from that same transport layer. As security features for 5G are developed, that security by design assumes, among other things, that the implicated standards bodies, 3GPP and others, treat security like any other critical design principle. In other words, products that are developed based on a set of design specifications incorporating effective security controls result in highly secure end products. So begin with the end in mind, task organize around the tried and true principles of effective cybersecurity organizations and design and develop with those considerations. So one must understand how we can mitigate both the perceived and real risks. The security aspects of 5G are critically important for several reasons. We have evolved from the era of wireless that supported cellular voice calls to an era that supports smart devices, the apps economy, and the early deployment of devices supporting the Internet of Things. As we move forward to that era of 5G, wireless networks will support the wide variety of new applications and services that will be at the core of our economy in industries that include utilities, energy, transportation, banking, and healthcare, all critical infrastructure sectors, just to name a few. The temptation for hackers to attack these networks and disrupt vitally important networks will even be greater. In the past, wireless networks and devices have, in certain instances, been vulnerable to such attacks. We must be more diligent in developing 5G to make sure that there are no such easy vulnerabilities in the future. In order for 5G to live up to its promise of providing highly ubiquitous connectivity involving people and machines, it must be fast, agile, and reliable, but it also must be secure. Without well-designed cybersecurity, personally identifying information, public safety, and the economy will be increasingly in jeopardy. We can't stress sufficiently that one of the key challenges facing this future network is supporting that wide spectrum of distinctly different use cases. But we have an opportunity now at the beginning stages to start this discussion and ensure that future networks are secure. First draft 5G standards will not be available until at least the end of 2018. So we've got time to get this right. That means we are in that pre-standard stage. And for those of you that have followed standards development work, it doesn't work at rocket speed. It's a back and forth, a give and take, negotiations. There's an interface with not just the domestic stakeholders, but an interface with companies in the worldwide market and the international community itself, governments and the ITU. So it's so important to define your objectives in protocol development at the very start. 5G will likely be a collection of different platforms, systems, and technologies, that ecosystem that still have yet to be defined. One characteristic that technologists frequently discuss is a software-centric core that is based on a new technology called software-defined networking, or SDN architectures. SDN exemplifies a significant paradigm shift in how networks and systems of the future will be designed, controlled, and managed. And I'd like this audience to also think about what we've done within the Armed Forces communications arena around software-defined radios. The notion of the guts of how those edge devices are going to operate, pull the protocols down, work the functions of modulation, demodulation. Think about much of that platform being derived from the cloud and the different ways in which edge devices now are going to be able to be deployed, connect with the network, and sustained through a life cycle. And when you think of the power of rapidly being able to evolve those software-defined elements, SDN and SDR, it really gets pretty exciting about what could be done. It also gets pretty scary about what can be taken advantage of if we don't bake into that SDN, SDR set of concepts the decision from the beginning to not just mitigate their vulnerabilities, but potentially turn the use of SDN and SDR into things that have defensive value. And I think that opportunity is there. There's a couple of exciting things going on in cryptography that really, if you think of cryptography applied to that transport layer, but also to the software-defined elements themselves, and doing that with purpose and at scale, we do have the potential, I think, to turn things that would otherwise be liabilities into strengths. These new networks will make it possible for enterprises and communication providers to gain unprecedented programmability, automation, and network control, enabling them to build scalable, flexible networks that readily adapt to changing business needs. The way this is accomplished is by decoupling the control and data planes, logically centralizing network intelligence and state, and abstracting the underlying network infrastructure from the applications. SDN is sometimes considered to carry that significant more cyber risk, but I do think we can and should look at this early stage at flipping that and turning that into an advantage. To that end, the FCC has tasked one of its federal advisory committees, the Technical Advisory Committee, TAC, to examine these issues and consider how to build in security rather than retrofitting. The TAC will seek to apply lessons learned from the long-running efforts to secure existing control plane protocols in wireless networks, but in networks in general, such as Border Gateway Protocol and DNS and the other existing protocols. The TAC will then leverage what was learned during the first phase of their work to develop best practices to mitigate cyber risk associated with software-defined networks, radios. Specifically, we have asked them to identify existing best practices that focus on securing programmable networks. Those practices we'll want to bring forward, particularly those based on SDN network architectures, and develop best practices that don't exist yet that need to be considered in the protocol development. The FCC has also asked the TAC to utilize what it has learned about Internet of Things and programmable network security in order to recommend to the FCC the strategy, procedures, and steps necessary to help incorporate the concept of security by design. So it's not just putting the entire burden on the network itself, but it's looking at the edge devices themselves and ensuring that we're looking at this as a need to secure the ecosystem. Because at the end of the day, it's really the data, right? Not necessarily the device, and it's the data with connectivity to that data, so it's availability. The group will consider what other key technical areas, if any, should be researched while exploring ways to integrate security by design concepts into 5G design specifications. And that's part of what the comments to our NPRM will help stimulate. We'll take unanswered concerns, opportunities from there, and turn that around into industry activity to work on those. They'll identify tools and security controls that should be built into 5G design specifications in order to make the networks and devices sufficiently secure from the onset. We further task them with outlining a strategy and procedures for ensuring that the security controls they identify become integrated into the 5G design specifications. The FCC and industry must coordinate efforts in order to maximize their effectiveness in this endeavor. Governments and industry in Asia, Europe, and North America will want to play a role in the development of 5G. There'll be competing 5G efforts in each of those areas. We're conscious that it was US carriers that got LTE rolling on a large scale, led by Verizon's launch of that technology in 39 metropolitan areas in December 2010. To maintain the United States leadership position here, we need to continue looking to the future and act now to facilitate the 5th generation of mobile technologies. We think the additional spectrum that we've already brought to the table here for 5G and the focus on ensuring that security is baked in from the beginning really will distinguish the 5G development effort in the United States and have that continue to be the lead effort for the world. Within the US government, many other agencies and organizations are looking to key aspects of 5G. This includes the US military. For instance, DARPA has developed nano-sized transistors under its terahertz electronics program, which could be instrumental in building 5G networks. Encryption, there's no better expert than the national security enterprise in evaluating goods, bads, and others with regard to encryption and ensuring that the encryption is good enough, is optimal for that wide range of uses that we talked about, that it's light enough where it doesn't get in the way of the very low latency kinds of uses that we're going to want to have from many of the Internet of Things sensors, that it's strong enough in other areas where we're going to want to really ensure that our bank accounts, our health records, all those things that are really personal to us are properly protected. The FCC has long taken a collaborative approach to cybersecurity. We work in partnership with private sector stakeholders and other government agencies through our various committees, particularly the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, which we affectionately refer to as the CISRIC. In March 2015, the CISRIC provided the FCC recommendations that included utilization by communication providers of the NIST Cybersecurity Risk Management Framework, volunteering to use the framework to assess and address risk in each of the identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover categories. For 5G, that commitment by the industry would be coupled with assurance mechanisms for which the FCC would use to gain insight on the cybersecurity health of the industry and broadly improve the cybersecurity posture within the communications sector. I expect that we at the FCC will use company to FCC engagements with providers to gain an appreciation for work being done to reduce not only that broader cybersecurity risk, but specifically cybersecurity risk as companies plan their 5G technology implementation. 5G can and will be a cornerstone in realizing the vision of the network society in which everything that can benefit from a connection will be connected. But instead of tackling 5G security by trying to implement all imaginable security mechanisms after the fact within the networks themselves, there needs to be that systematic and analytical multi-stakeholder approach that involves the entire ecosystem and have that group address risk across the ecosystem as capabilities are contemplated for 5G. This should be anchored in a new trust model for 5G networks. The trust model must deliver an evolved 5G security architecture that will be able to provide a trustworthy, reliable network platform from which consumers and their edge devices can reliably draw upon and potentially pull trust attributes that contribute to the overriding objective of protecting the wide range of consumer, government, and business data riding over networks, drawn from the cloud and presented at the edge. Organizing from the beginning to use cybersecurity risk management principles should increase the likelihood that industry will deliver secure 5G network capabilities in the most effective and efficient manner possible. We've got a window of opportunity to get 5G right from the initial design phase, but these plans will only succeed if there are real commitments to cybersecurity from those who are developing 5G and those who own the various parts of our communication networks. We're in the early stages on that path, and I encourage stakeholders in the mobile broadband industry, incumbent fixed service providers, satellite providers, edge device providers, government S&T and R&D labs, and others to take a fresh look at how things are done, to be open to the extraordinary possibilities this next generation technology may present, to come up on the net and communicate 5G security concerns and ideas, and to continue to work individually and collectively to help unlock the full potential for 5G, providing new possibilities and improving the lives of Americans and people around the world. So let me close there, and I'd love to take some questions if the audience has some thoughts or hear your observations on 5G in the future. And I think we've got some that have been collected, right, Randy?
Yes, sir. So we're running short on time, so, sir, we're going to ask one question, but
Great.
It's a very good question. So, Rear Admiral David Simpson, you mentioned DoD's success in spectrum sharing pilots. What are some of the lessons learned that industry can use for future spectrum sharing initiatives?
It's a great question, and I know from both working within DoD as we began to challenge the notion that we needed to constrain ourselves to fixed apportionments of spectrum, and then regularly be disappointed when we would deploy, because the country we would deploy to would have a different set of assignments within that country, and the radios no worky in the country we deployed in, that we flipped. We turned on the head the notion that, wait a minute, is it right to design our radios in that ecosystem around these fixed assignments, or do what we really want would be more agile devices that can be ready to work in a wide variety of spectrum situations and to be able to coexist with other kinds of uses. So DoD really is on the cutting edge of figuring out how to make that coexistence work. And it didn't just start with the most current DoD spectrum strategy. Let's go all the way back to demand assigned multiple access radios. We've been working this in DoD and more broadly in the Homeland Security arena for years, figuring out how to get more out of less with spectrum. And the lessons of one, you need to first be able to assess the spectrum environment that you're actually working in. That's a technical thing. We need to make sure that we're baking in. That assessment then can adjust and make arrangements so that the devices in the control plane are able to coordinate their use of spectrum so that they're not negatively adding destructive noise to another legitimate function. We've solved that a number of times. We're now embarked in the S&T in ways that would solve that in much more elegant manner. DoD and the security community has worked that encryption piece, that encryption of the control plane, but also encryption, appropriate encryption of the data plane. So I think those are some of the many ways in which continued investments in both S&T and R&D in DoD, DHS, and other organizations can positively contribute to ensuring that when we get ready in 2018 to lock in the 5G protocols, that they do have security baked in from the beginning to wind up so that agility that we just talked about is agility that can withstand an adversary that would want to get in and disrupt critical communications over 5G.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Randy.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Rear Admiral David Simpson.
Thank you, Rear Admiral Simpson. Great presentation. I'm Nick Nyland. I'm the managing partner for Verizon's Internet of Things business in DoD. And I'm here to introduce our next panel. Next panel will focus on IoT, ISR, robotics. This panel was coordinated and produced by myself, Andrew Osborne, and Ken Morgan, who's going to be our moderator today. Ken Morgan is the Chief IT Integration Branch Director of Resource Integration, DCS Logistics, Engineering and Force Protection, A4, U.S. Air Force. The panelists are going to be Teresa Carlson, Vice President, Worldwide Public Sector, Amazon Web Services; Rex Carey, Chief Logistics, Chief Information Officer, Support Division, Directorate of Resource Integration, DCS Logistics; Engineering and Force Protection, A4, U.S. Air Force; Mr. Carl Guerreri, Chief Executive Officer, EWA; and Frank Konieczny, CTO, U.S. Air Force. And I'll introduce Mr. Ken Morgan.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm going to be your moderator this afternoon for the Internet of Things, ISR and robotics. It's an interesting field right now. If you look at, the weather that we had last night, having the ability to sense the environment, respond to the environment, ISR, robotics, the ability to advance our human capital, reduce our workforce. So with that, I'd like to give the panel members a few minutes to introduce themselves.
Hi, good morning. So everybody made it out here? I'm surprised I couldn't get home last night hardly. So my name's Teresa Carlson, and I am the Worldwide Vice President of Amazon Web Services for Public Sector.
Carl Guerreri, CEO of Electronic Warfare Associates.
Rex Curry, Air Force Logistics CIO support, is filling in for Brigadier General Cedric George, who couldn't be here with us, but I'll be trying to help talk that role for him.
That'd be interesting. I'm Frank Konieczny. I'm the Air Force CTO, meaning all things IT.
Okay, we've had a few questions to come in already. First one is for the panel. How do you see the support of IoT deployments in the DoD environment? Will those be out of the band, over the air, physically managed?
You want me to start?
Mr.
It's an easy
Konieczny?
one, yes.
Yes, sir.
It'll be managed. I mean, one of the problems we have is that if we have too many IoT devices that we don't know what they are, it poses a security threat, especially if they come through with, Wi-Fi going to some cloud someplace that we have no idea what's happening. So yes, we're going to have to manage all those IoT devices. Now that's a pain because there's going to be lots of them and they're going to appear out of nowhere. So there's going to have to be some MDM out there that we're actually going to use for those devices. And we can get into, later on what all the IoT devices we think there's going to be out there.
Okay, any other comments from the...
Well, I'll just say, so you mean devices like this? we were talking about there are going to be a lot of devices, and I agree completely. You have to be able to manage and lock those devices down. And they're happening very rapidly in the way even logistics and supply chain is changing. And I think one of the questions you ask is, how could this be used? And this is a great example of how Amazon today actually uses IoT. So if you do any fulfillment by Amazon, you can put a device like this in your washroom, your laundry room, and fulfill in real time your Tide detergent or whatever flavor you love. You can also do it in your refrigerator. So it can be connected. It is connected to the internet. And this is just an example of how any supply chain could be actually managed and utilized. Again, it's got to be done within the parameters of the secure networks that are set up, but all that is absolutely possible. And the other thing that I would say, it's not just the devices, but the ability to manage the data that's actually coming down and over the air around this, because the analytics piece is going to be just as important for the Department of Defense, to be able to take the information that's happening and in real time analyze that. And I do believe that is going to be one of the major benefits of having IoT deployed type devices and a programmatic approach to how defense can utilize these kind of programmatic elements and tools, hardware devices into their enterprise.
Well, I guess I would say next, and that to Mr. Kay's point, from a logistics perspective, we make up 60% of the Air Force. So when you say, the commanders' tools and things, 60% of those belong to us too. And what they want from us is the ability to use those shiny tools. And it's wonderful, as Teresa was showing us that. But then as soon as I said, okay, now will you let us use it? And he's like, absolutely not. And so that's the problem, is we can all go out there and we see in these events the shiny tools, and then we try to bring them home with us and we can't. And many times we do it anyway. And then we come to our folks here in the A6 community for us and force it on them to figure out a way to let us use the tools that we've become dependent on without their help.
Right.
You know, and some of the conversations we have as we shrink as a DOD and an Air Force, we've got to do better with what we have. And one of the things in our future states is to sense and respond. We want to know when we go to a location, you know, if I go to a place and I plug in something electrical, the logistics guy didn't figure out how the electricity got there. He just uses it. And we want the same kind of a premise with the Internet of Things. We just want to take them, we want to plug them in, we want to use them, and know that they're going to work. And then we want to grab the data from them that allows us to sense and respond. When we track an item from point A to point B, and that's great for the person that needs the item, people to track the item, right? But over time, we want to track many items going from point A to point B and wherever, and exploit that beneficial information to sense and respond in a future state. And in today's world, with 70s vintage legacy IT systems, you can't do that. We can't take advantage of that. And so what we wind up doing is we buy the shiny tools, we employ them ourselves without our A6 brethren who've been downsized right along with us, and they don't have the bodies to do it at a base level, but we force them to do it at a base level, and it doesn't work. And now we're stuck with the tools we bought. We can't use the tools we bought. And all our airmen see is they're just frustrated. They can go home, and their house is more wired than the place they work. And they could do everything from their phone. And the first thing we tell them when they come to work, here, take that, turn it off, and stick it in this box, because you can't use that here. And I think from a DOD perspective, it's very frustrating for us. You know, we're getting smaller, and we gave up, for a lot of our IT capitalization, we gave up people for those efficiencies, right? And now we have budget control acts, and we have to get smaller and be more efficient. And so now to make up the difference, because we never exploited the technologies, we're taking aircraft maintenance guys off of the aircraft, and they're fat fingering data that should be automatically captured and transmitted. You know, I can go to get my car fixed, and they scan it, they do it, and it's done to the parts guy. We do it all manually now. And places where we put in the technologies, they don't work because he unplugged them.
It's my fault now. Jeez, you know.
I told him I was going to make fun of him.
But we're working on that.
We are working
We're
on
working on that, and I agree. You know, it is some of these. It's a journey. I tell everybody to the cloud, and these are one of the things that Department of Defense is going to get there. But we do have to. We'd love to help move faster, and some of these elements of being able to let our warfighters take advantage of the really amazing tools and processes. And I think also for the individuals coming into the military today that just have access to these kind of tools, you're right, it's really hard for them because all of a sudden they feel like they've gone back into the dark ages because they're so used to having access. But we are going to change that. And I will tell you, at Amazon Web Services, we are completely committed to helping DoD move in the right direction. It may take us a while, but these kind of things are important, and they're going to allow our warfighters to really fight the war that's being fought today, which a lot of it is over the internet. It's true.
I mean, our major concern all the time is, you know, how secure is the devices that you're using? I mean, you know, the Tide example is interesting, but, you know, if you got 2,000 pounds of Tide ordered, you're not going to be very happy.
Right.
Also, the data is another issue. I mean, if we're looking at the supply chain data and we're gathering the supply chain data, gathering and understanding what that means could actually give an enemy an awareness of what is actually happening.
It could be just as beneficial for them as it is for us.
Right. They don't even have to break into the device itself and look at supply chain. They could just look at the data that we generate for it. So there's concerns with that, too, that we have to take care of before we actually field something. Now, that's messy. It's messy for AFCEA.
It doesn't stop us. We do it anyway.
Right.
Mr. Gurry.
And then we come hacking.
I believe Mr. Gurry has.
Yeah, I hear a lot of talk about the supply chain, and that's important. But when we talk about the Internet of Things and what the military has and what they have to deal with, it's more than that. We wired 2 military bases for environmental things, environmental monitoring and control. But beyond that, you have medical stuff, you have smart buildings, you have a whole plethora of applications for the, quote, Internet of Things. What would really help if there was some standard set or common definitions so when people do things, they everybody's working towards something in common. So I'd just like to suggest that there's a very broad issue here, and all these things that we've talked about, security and applications and environmental things, that we have to figure a way to make them all work together. And that goes to the standards or formats of data, and how are you going to use it, where are you going to store the data, who's going to have access to the analysis, or who's going to get to analyze it, what happens to it. And I'd like to point out that in the military application, they're very concerned about security. If you look at commercial and civilian thing, you get security and privacy. The military can make you give up your privacy to a large degree. So security becomes a bigger elephant in the tent. But there's still an issue of privacy, and somebody will say, why? I'll say, well, go to a hospital on a military base. You now have your private data there. They have to make sure that's protected if you're using all of those things in an IoT.
Could I just say one more thing about the veterans on IoT? The Secretary of the VA is really focused in on working with our veterans too, and utilizing IoT, and even thinking through new ways of talking to Congress about sort of accelerating some of the tools that could be used. Because if you think about the ability to manage and work with our veterans, who are all over the world and in different geographic locations, we need them to be monitored. We need them to be able to have access to medical care when they need it. And it's one of the things they're diving into, because IoT has become pretty much now standard with healthcare companies around the world, and how they're thinking through models to assess and manage patients. And I also think IoT, not only for the mission side, but also for the support of our veterans, to be able to monitor them on a much more regular basis, especially given the new set of problems that we've found over the last 10 to 15 years as our military men and women come back from the field.
Thank you. Keon, do you have questions?
Yes, this is a two-part question. What is the Air Force doing to set up an office for evaluating IoT devices in a timely manner? How can possible policies be changed to adapt to the speed of this ever-changing environment?
Okay, the first part's easy.
I wrote that question.
Oh, you did, huh? We actually set up a mobility enterprise services panel to actually support that endeavor of looking at IoT devices and how we're going to manage them, and across the board what we're going to do with them. And that's an enterprise level viewpoint of, for the Air Force across the board. Changing the policy is interesting. I mean, the question of what policy do we have to change, or do we have to actually generate policy for this? I mean, as you go across, I mean, there's PII policy already established. And the question is, okay, am I monitoring your Fitbit, or I see Fitbits, or I see anything, wearables that are monitoring your physical environment or whatever, is that PII data? And it probably is. And so all the data that's accumulating from all those devices someplace has to be put in and secured. So that's a policy already. Establishing them faster is probably not the real issue. It's a question of how am I going to understand that they're secure and they're registered within the environment so that we can actually manage those correctly. What we don't want is, somebody coming on a base, and there's a lot of people come on base. You guys come on bases too. We can't restrict you coming on bases and having a device. I mean, half you guys probably have Fitbits and Apple Watches and Samsung Watches and things like that. That is transmitting data all over the place. What is our responsibility to not grab your data? Because if we grab your data, we probably do it illegally, because unless we have a big sign at the base that says, anytime you enter here, all your data is ours, which is not normally the case. So those are the parameters of some of the policies that somebody has to develop. And then there's also the policies of what, besides the data, what devices do we really want? I mean, the clicker is really cool, but if they misuse it or somebody misuses it, then it's a question of what policy do you have to support some reprimand that's going to occur with the misuse of a device.
Also, the ability to use the IT to manage the policies. I think also, being able to take advantage. When you set these policies, the technology today actually does allow you, because you can know and understand when the first rule of security, they say know what you're securing, right? And the ability through your infrastructure, through a really rich infrastructure, you can now take a look at what's writing on that and set policies much more easily. Again, as you modernize the IT, I do believe a lot of those things just are so much easier to manage. And it's what you said, you're sort of stuck between worlds right now. You're in a really a legacy world. You're trying to modernize what you're doing in DoD. Once you get to that modernized world, and maybe this could be an area you could really begin to think about modernizing more rapidly, pick one area and say, how do we get there faster?
We always want to modernize more rapidly. If we could fix some of the acquisition issues associated with that, we'd be fine. I mean, one of the endeavors is to actually do these things faster. And it's a question of how can we move policy, move acquisition to actually do it faster. Is this a cyber threat that we have to counter, or is it something else? How can we do rapid acquisition? It's always been an issue that we're still trying to wrestle with.
Yeah, it's very difficult to take advantage of a technology cycle that's in a 1 to 3 year process when the acquisition just to award the contract is 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
By the time you've got it, the folks in the field are like, you went on and bought that? Yeah, we're past that now. It's great that you bought 3 years ago technology for us. But we found this thing that does it even better than 3 years ago. And we can never catch up. We need a life cycle to them that, from an industry perspective, is you bring shiny toys into us and you go to our bases and our commanders and our senior leadership, stop promising them you can solve all their problems in 3 months. You can deliver this in 2 months. And I'm not indicting Teresa here, but you can't give them the shiny toy, quick, fast solution and ignore our means to get to it.
Right. Acquisition
Right?
is a huge, there's no doubt, acquisition is a huge problem, and we need something, generally, it's one of the things I talk about a lot on Capitol Hill is, technology is evolving, and when you go around the world, a lot of governments around the world have set programs up where they're actually able to acquire technology and acquire in a way where they're getting the innovations associated with it. And that's really what you're talking about. You want to acquire, but you also want a path to where you don't have to keep paying for those innovations. You should get them as part of whoever you're dealing with on a regular basis.
I mean, we talked about an agile innovation contract and how we'd actually plan it out. The
Yeah.
problem with that a lot of times is that you have X number of dollars and X number of hours to deliver something. And so you have to understand when we do things like an agile innovation that you have parameters that you have to play with. But the contracting would say something like, every year I may add more money based upon what I'm going to do. So, you have to put that task order kind of concept into it as opposed to anything else in the contract. And then we can do it. But again, it has to be some justification for actually going and doing an innovation. You have to show why, as opposed to, it's really a good idea and we all think we should do it.
Mr. Gurry, from the point of manufacturing, I know you produce products pretty rapidly. So is there any techniques that you've adopted working with your customers?
One of the things we try and do is get an IDIQ contract in place so we only have to do a task on a contract instead of the contract going through. I mean, look, everybody knows that the contracting process is the long pole in the tent. It's what really slows things down for really sometimes, how can I put it politely? For reasons that to the government infrastructure makes a lot of sense, but practically doesn't mean a damn thing. I'll give you an example. We had a task order going through, and one of the people in our company in the contracts department initialed the lower left corner of the piece of paper, so internally we knew that she saw it. Hit the government, and they rejected that and threw us into another 3-month loop because that was an unauthorized mark on the contract. I'll give you an eraser. But everybody in here knows the problems associated with government contracting, and it's exactly what you say. It takes X amount of time to get a contract in place, and by that time the technology is outdated. So the way EWA tries to do it is, okay, you've explained the rules, but we found out we can get a task order through in 3 months instead of 3 years. So we try and do it that way.
And one more example on that, that's so true. What we've tried to do with the government is, it does take a long time, and when we built this business and we came into government, we said it would take time for people to understand how to procure cloud, as an example, and all the tools associated. And I think that's changed now, where the business has changed. It's not maybe in defense as rapidly, but I also see defense is starting to pick up and take advantage of cloud-based tools and technologies in a much more rapid way as well. But there's a couple of good examples. One is in the intelligence community with the C2S contract. They've done a couple of other things. They've done a flywheel contract where they actually rapidly bring on new kind of vendors that have cloud-based experience. And the other one is we just are putting something in there, C2S, called Marketplace. And Marketplace is equivalent to the Amazon Web Services, which we have thousands of partners and vendors in there today. And now the intelligence community will have access to the Marketplace through the C2S contract, which is going to be hundreds of new types of technologies that they can try in real time. And it'll be part of that. So they're going to have the ability to do rapid acquisition through this vehicle. And one I wanted just to point out that's not in this country, but in the UK created something called a G-Cloud contract. They completely disrupted the way they do acquisitions in the UK government today. And they have something called the G-Cloud that they do 6-month acquisition cycles. So literally, as a vendor on that, we have to re-up every 6 months. They've spread it out to like 8. But it's really sort of cool. It's a bit painful, but it's cool because you can get on that contract really fast. And then every government agency has access to all these vendors. It's like then they just create a task order. So then they're just tasking. And so there are a lot of creative and cool ways, I think, out there that are going on. And also here in the U.S. government, there are vehicles that are there, and they're growing very rapidly. And I think what I'm hearing here is we got to figure out how we do that maybe a little bit faster in DoD, breaking down some of those walls, perhaps.
Yeah, I would say as you get to services and infrastructure, I think as you'd said, there are lots of contracts where I can get to developers and security specialists and those kinds of things with our platforms and our IT. But when it comes from, I don't want to own any of it. I just want to pay for the service.
Right.
I want to early fail. If it doesn't work, I want to unplug it, I'm done. It's like the apartment. Apartment stinks, I don't like it anymore, I stop paying, and I go find me another place, right? And so that we don't get so logged into and married to the technology that we just can't see ever getting rid of it, even if it only delivers 20% of what we need. And we have so many of our logistics systems that are like that. We've had them for decades, and some people fight to keep them, but will be the first ones to say, well, the first thing I do when I run this module is go over here and correct all the bad data it gave me because the bad data was in, and this was wrong, and who's man to do that? Well, I don't have a manpower. That's another conversation. But I love this system. Don't turn it off. And it's that problem. We don't want to own them anymore. Let's rent them. You know, rent the service. And if you want to use it on the phone, an actual phone, that works, that I can use, to where it's a widget. And if I want to know about the A10 thing to do that thing, because that's what I work on, that's all I have to worry about. I don't have to learn about every single weapon system in the system and learn, well, this will date me, but 120 card columns of crap when I only care about 120. That's the only bit of information I care about. But I'm forced through all these other reams, again, dated, paper, just to get, what I work on. I can put that in a widget and an app, and it's on my phone. And that's what we want. That's what we want to go to, because we're trying to get out of creating, developing IT that we own. Yeah. We just want to rent it. Provide the services wherever the means. I don't want to have to worry about the skills of a security guy, a developer guy, an engineering guy. Provide that to me. Here's my requirements. I'm a demanding customer. Here's what I need to do with it. Here's how I want to use it. And it has to be consistent. Wherever I go on the globe, I got to know it works the same. And if I need to pivot, we were going to go here and the world shifted and now we're going there. It's got to go with me. I can't have in our future concepts, right? We want to be able to pivot on a dime and go do something different because that's what our foes in the future are going to require us to do. It's dynamic, right? We're not going to have an adversary that's going to allow us 12 months ahead of time to put a whole bunch of stuff to come kick their butt. That's just not the way the world works anymore. We have to be able to react immediately, and our data doesn't allow us to do that. It's disparate, it's broken, and it takes a huge amount of people to translate the data from the systems instead of the system gives you the output. We just don't have the human capital anymore to do that.
Keon, do you have any more questions?
Yes. What type of infrastructure investments is the Air Force making to handle an IoT-connected work? There are huge considerations for securely storing data, ensuring steady and reliable network connections, et cetera, when we're using real-time data to support the warfighter.
Okay, it's back to me again. The part of the mobility panel that we actually have is looking at network connectivity at a base, looking at exactly what is needed for all this activity that's going on. So some of us, we talked about having private LTE as well as public LTE, as well as Wi-Fi within the base environments and everything else to support all the IoT devices. Again, the question becomes, what IoT devices are we actually going to register and control as opposed to anything else, and that's what the bandwidth is supposed to be based on, except probably the public LTE that we'll probably have at the base is for everybody else. And it's a question, we go back and forth. I mean, a lot of the devices, if they're Wi-Fi, are dangerous to us at times, as opposed to, Bluetooth, which is somewhat smaller in the range. But, it's a question of how much we're going to intercept and what's going to influence everything else, because some devices can influence other devices. What was the last part? What was the last part of that question? That's the first part.
There are huge considerations for securely storing data.
Oh, the data part. Okay, the data part, as Rex has said, we want everything as a service. I mean, to be honest. We're trying to get out of the Air Force is trying to get out of the IT business itself as opposed to having it as a service. So we look for cloud providers, we look for base traffic as, if there has to be a data center and a base, we want to be able to have it as a service. We do not want to actually run it ourselves anymore. We do not have the airmen to actually do this or the manpower to do this. We want airmen actually working on mission, which they're supposed to be at, instead of doing the labor that you guys and everybody else in the community can do much better. So that's the intent, is the data we're going to have to figure out. Now, there's lots of data that's going to be, even the new airplanes are generating tons and tons of data, petabytes of data. The question is where are we going to put it and why are we going to keep it?
And how are we going to exploit it?
And how are we going to exploit it? Those are the questions that we have to work with the community on, because, we can get 10 petabytes of data from an aircraft, and then what are we going to do with it? And that, we cannot put it in the Air Force per se. We'd have to use a cloud provider to actually store it out there. And then we have to do the analysis of what we want to keep it, how long we want to keep it, and what we're going to do with it, and get rid of it.
The good news on the storage side, for especially all the devices and data coming down, storage, of course, the cost of storage has gotten really low. You have tiered storage models today, and we're seeing it. Storage is exploding around the world. A lot of our customers, some of their largest workloads is storage, and now it's becoming managed storage. It's tiered. How do you make decisions on it? How do you set policies as soon as you store that data? Do you put it in Glacier, which is our deep storage? Do you use it as an internet storage? So the nice thing is the technology itself has evolved, and the security around it has gotten so much better with the types of encryption. And for us, we make sure we meet or exceed all the security parameters that the U.S. government has set. And we're also trying to work on ways, how do we innovate those security models even, and compliance models in ways that allows the user in the enterprise to take advantage in real time of that data and be able to rapidly crunch and analyze it. And I think when you're looking at devices like this and what the military has, the mission, that is going to be one of the biggest considerations. You're right. What data are you storing? Where are you storing it? How long do you store it? And how do you manage it and get access to it and rapidly get it to the analyst or the end user in a way that's truly meaningful? There's a lot of great use cases out there today, but like the panel's saying, I think it's going to come down to sort of what's the model that Air Force wants to take advantage of.
And we have to tag it accordingly for research and discovery, and we have to tag it for disposition because we have to get rid of that data at some point in time. So there's going to be those considerations as well.
So Mr. Geary, in your deployments of smart cities and bases and stuff, how have you leveraged the existing infrastructure? Like we talked about wireless before. I know you were saying that you can use any wireless.
When I'll tell you, it was one of the places that we did was Tobyhanna, and it was to look at all the environmental things that could impact the environment of Tobyhanna. The direct answer to your question, we used infrastructure that was already there. We used fiber optics, we used hardwire, we used wireless, and when there wasn't something there, we then installed a communications device to get the data back. We instrumented for things like, wastewater, drinking water, environmental, temperature of the roads, all the storage, all the pumps, the levels of the water, levels of usage of power, what pump was on, one pump was off, and we brought it all back to a command center. But we used, to the maximum extent possible, everything that was already there. So it was really a mix of devices. We didn't reinvent the wheel, and I think you could do the same thing at any other thing. The other place we did was the Radford Army Ammunition Plant. And that had a few other things because we were now starting to monitor ammonia levels, some nitrogen, because if that is located close to a city, Radford, and they had to know which way the wind was blowing and was there any releases that could endanger anybody. So it was a fairly complicated thing, and we tied together. I know I can safely say hundreds of sensors, probably into the thousands, but I don't want to. Basically, almost every pump that handled any kind of liquid, dark water, light chemicals, chlorines, and everything. So we used the existing infrastructure where possible, and we had, as I said, it was wireless, it was wired, it was fiber optics, whatever was there. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Keon, you have?
The government contracting process is not the long pole. Defining the requirements is. Comments?
Oh, I got to go. Who's the acquisition weenie in the room? There's always one. So I would offer, I used to, well, I'm not sure I drank the Kool-Aid, I maybe sipped it. But I believed that for a period of time because I'd been on a lot of failed efforts that understandably, we delivered a set of requirements that could have been better, and we hand them to a contractor, and then they tried to figure out what we meant for the next 12 months or so. So we've done that recently where we do a very deliberate service development delivery process where step one is define the problem, the stakeholders, the laws, rules, et cetera, and very deliberately come up with requirements to get to a material decision, course of action analysis, very in depth, and hand off to the acquisition process. All of this was meant to fix that. And we go into industry day with, this is the best requirements we have ever seen out of logistics. Best requirements from the acquisition folks. And yet, almost 2 years later, we still don't have a contract. 2 years. Our need date was 2 years ago. And to that point, Lieutenant General Litchfield, our customer at the Air Force Sustainment Center, to my boss then, General Johnson, at a Christmas gathering in Oklahoma City, I think it was, gave her a big lump of coal as his Christmas present to her. Because he was about to retire, and she still had not delivered what he had wanted a couple of years earlier than that. And in our acquisition process, Not to do, there are great reasons to have it. It just isn't responsive to the mission needs for us. We're in a business state, and we have pressures to be like business, be like industry. We're benchmarked in logistics against industry for good reasons. We do a lot of the same things as industry. But we have an acquisition process that's okay to spend 15 years to develop a fighter, a bomber, and it's okay to do that because you're building it.
Right.
But we're talking about buying something that industry's been using for 10 years. We didn't build it, we didn't create it, we just want to use it. Give us a process that allows us to take advantage of it. So where is the, I won't call you out, never mind. The one acquisition guy in the room that thinks it's about requirements. I believe you. We went through that process, and now we're still at the fence 2 years later, and we can't get a contract awarded for all kinds of reasons. And at the end of the day, the users are still using the same 300 and something systems that don't talk to each other. You know, we have one that creates requirements computations, right? They run that model a few times a year. You know what the first thing they do after they run the model? They call it file maintaining. You know what that means? Fix all the errors of the system because the system is wrong. And that's manual processes. We just churn away at our human capital. We just don't have it anymore. And we're under pressures to get smaller. So for the acquisition guy, I don't think you're right. It isn't about requirements. We've gotten much better at defining our requirements, and we spend a lot of deliberate time in process reengineering to collapse many threads of requirements in our functional space to avoid rice objects and those things later, so that we come in with a single set of requirements. And when we get to that development piece or integration piece, you're not trying to solve a lot of masters on what the requirements are, which is kind of what we've always done in the past, right? You get into the group. I'm not doing that now. We know, and we give you a hard set of requirements coming in. We still can't get it out of the other side. So.
One of the things I just wanted to say on acquisitions is we spend a tremendous amount of time literally on Capitol Hill doing what you just said, which is trying to educate literally our lawmakers on technology has evolved and changed. Like that's, we have to catch up here in the United States because we are the greatest innovators in the world. We are the greatest innovators. When you go around the world, name the top 5 companies that are doing IT. They're all in the United States. And all the startups, you got to Silicon Valley. You go right here in Washington, D.C., we have some amazing startups. And we have to be able to take advantage of that technology. And I do believe one of the great points you just made is that the ability to absorb that technology has changed even from 8 years ago. And the ability to evolve the acquisition process. So we have to be able to allow our acquisition officials the flexibility to do the real-time acquisitions of technology and be able to take advantage of it. And we do spend, I don't know how much it's helping, but I spend a lot of my personal time on Capitol Hill talking to lawmakers where we're educating them on companies like Amazon Web Services that didn't even exist till 2006. And now we're scaling like crazy, and then we created an entire ecosystem around us that keeps scaling and building and creating new tools, and that's what we want. So we have to be able to allow our government customers to take advantage of that. And I'd just like to say right now, if there's anything we can do to help support the acquisition officials on the education side or provide acquisitions that have shaped up nicely and have moved, we're more than happy to do that.
Hey, I want to say this. You just heard my comments on the acquisition thing, but the government can buy things fast. For people who maybe have as much gray hair as I do, you remember back to the Vietnam days, they had QRC programs. With QRC, you could get things fielded, you do it in time, a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I once, at one point, had a contract with a group that written into the contract was the COTR, not the contracting officer, had the ability to issue binding verbal direction. Now, that would be heresy today. I'm not saying you have to do that, but I'm saying you go back in history, you look, there are examples of being able to procure things very quickly and get them into the field. Maybe we need to look at history, learn from it, and adapt the best parts of it to what we're doing.
You have another question?
Yes.
And my coughing has nothing to do with his comments, okay? It's not a commentary. Just have a cold.
Do you see IoT being generic like laptops where the hardware becomes generic based on well-defined standards, but just add an app to do the sensing?
I think we would like to have the hardware more generic and standardized across the board because there's so many protocols and various things out there right now. It's very difficult to keep track of everything. That's going to be one of the problems we're going to have because there's not one protocol that actually controls, you know, cars and trucks and everything else. It depends on the manufacturer, it depends on what implementation they put in the cars and vehicles, it depends on, you know, the Fitbits and everything else out there. So it'd be nice if it was standardized. And so that's going to be one of the challenges that we have is when we say we want to manage this, we want to know what traffic is going across the lines, is that we have to figure it out. And it'd be nice if we had an overall standard. Now, standards sometimes stop innovation. And so I think we're on the innovation stage right now of this. And until, you know, we finish innovating, lots of things come across, and some innovation devices lose favor and some others gain, then we'll see more of a standardized approach, at least at the, you know, the NIST standard level, if you will, as opposed to anything else. But right now, it's a wild, wild west, which is really good. Lots of people coming in. You know, they're talking about doing wearables now and everything else that you will never notice you have a device on you, which is interesting, except it's transmitting to your phone what you're doing. So, yes, standard would be nice, but we have to live in the innovation realm right now, and that's what we got to cope with. And, you know, that's probably something that we need to consider going forward all the time, is that we can't assume that it's going to be open standards forever. That as things innovate and things become new and new devices and capabilities come back to us that we have to implement, we have to assume that you're going to have chaos, and then we have to manage that chaos.
I think we're in a big stage of open innovation. I think you're spot on. Like, we're in this really rapid kind of era of innovation with devices and hardware. And this might be a good opportunity actually for sort of a public-private partnership between government and industry to sort of come together and look at today the types of requirements and begin to create something, because you do have to be really careful. When you standardize things, you can lock down innovation rapidly, and you don't want to do that yet because we're not anywhere where we need to be with this. We're just getting there, and that's a good thing. But I also, my personal opinion is, I've been involved in government for so long, I like the concept of bringing government into the innovation that's happening in industry and getting their feedback. And I do think this is one area that we could do a nice job if we come together and just really start evaluating what's out there and beginning to, again, not stagnate it, but begin to sort of corral it to figure out what are these areas that looks like it could work really nicely within the mission space and other things. Because also I think government wants to take advantage of the rapid innovation right now by getting as many of their requirements into industry so industry can play off that and create new tools for them right now, so they're not having to do the R&D work. Let commercial enterprise do that, and then government be able to take advantage of that. But I do think it's a delicate balance, but I think there are ways we could do a better job jointly today by having that dialogue.
So I think the other part of Keon's question was the applications or the application layer. Do you see a standard application layer being?
Standard from the user viewpoint, but not from the property development viewpoint. I mean, what we try to make sure is that when we field an application anywhere, that it should have the same look and feel across the board if you're going mobile or you're not. But just because if you confuse the user when you go mobile, it's not going to help the user. The user experience should be better or the same, at least in terms of how you authenticate in and how you actually manage the data and things. So I think the application layer from the user interface is going to look the same or be standardized across. But there's too many environments right now that you're going to have to cater to as you have to do applications. And then we have to make a decision as to what environments we want to spend money on application development tools.
So one of the other questions was that how do you create an ROI model to prove the value of IoT in the DoD?
I'll give it to Rex.
Well, we had talked about this before. I think part of it is we have to accept sometimes it's a negative ROI. And there's that dip before we get to the point where it's actually going to be a tangible return on investment. But unfortunately, as you go to get funding, they don't accept that up front. And that's why it's so important that it's not a logistics conversation anymore. It's an enterprise conversation. It's an FM. It's an HR types of folks. It's logistics, CE. It's all of us coming together to get to what eventually becomes the positive ROI. You've got to invest in the infrastructure. We just don't want to have to pay for it every time, everywhere. We want him to pay for it.
I'd suggest that you have to define how you measure return on the investment. It isn't always measured in dollars. If you can put a widget out near an airplane, which means you can prep that airplane ready for a mission in 1 hour, less than it would ordinarily take, or 2 hours, how many people were involved in that? What do? Quantify their salaries and say that's what you've saved? Or do you look at the greater thing and say, how do you value that mission that they were about to fly? So when I hear the term ROI, look, to me, ordinarily, I would think in terms of dollars. How many dollars did you save? But that isn't really necessarily the measure of the return on the investment you made. It might be we've saved lives. On a search and rescue mission, we rescued somebody who we might not have gotten to because we had this new radio. It might be that you need less of something in a logistics system. That's easier to measure because that does have a dollar. But there are a lot of intangibles. So we have to be careful when we look at the term ROI.
I agree with that. I think that's a really good point, because is it time to mission? Is it time to deploy? And I think the IoT era is going to extremely drive DoD into greater efficiency. The idea of better analytics and true real-time situational awareness, also just finding information more rapidly through some of the tools and models. And there actually are dozens and dozens, probably hundreds, but it could probably hundreds at this point, of case studies that are out there already that I think DoD can take advantage of within the enterprise space. And also one other idea is to approach it from being able to run a pilot or a proof of concept today is much easier than it ever was before. You don't need all the hardware. You don't have the supply chain time to even run a pilot or proof of concept could actually demonstrate the efficiencies, whether it be time, mission, money. But I do think it's important to define what are we looking for in an ROI in each application.
So you had talked about the public-private partnerships. Is there any sharing of funding in those relationships?
For me, I think when you say sharing of money, what do you mean by sharing?
Costs like hosting environments and that kind of stuff to run the pilot activities?
Yes, I mean, I think from that perspective, when you're looking at something, and we've done many of these. I've done many in my career over time, but really it's setting up an end goal game. We're doing something right now. I'll give an example in a sort of a not-for-profit space, but we're working with one of the major foundations to build a next generation research platform. And that's a joint effort between business planning, funding. It's a board that is actually coming up with the decision-making process on how we're going to do this. So it's working beautifully. And we also do that. We've done something with the government of Singapore around a public-private partnership. And we continue to look at these around the world, but when it comes to the you just sort of set up a board, you set up the parameters, and you each have a stake in it, and you have jointly defined outcomes that you want to get out of the partnership?
For us, it's easy. It's a thing the government has called a CRADA, a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. We have a number of those in place, and yes, I've paid for government people, use of government facilities. The government puts things into it also. So there is at the federal level, where we work, mechanisms to do that.
And we have a couple of CRADAs as well. Thank you for bringing that up. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I couldn't remember what it was, a CRADA.
Except CRADAs take 3 to 6 months to actually get done, so it's not really quick. Just because of the other issues with it.
The good thing about, I'm working one right now, it's about 2 months into it. It'll probably be 4 or 5 months, but it's a 5-year CRADA.
Yeah.
It's for 5 years. So once we get it in place, and we've sort of written a statement of work so that you could, for the logistics guys, could drive a big truck through it.
We drive big trucks.
Yeah, you drive the big trucks. So there are mechanisms, and we do contribute to that. The interesting part about is in CRADA, the government cannot give us money or fund
That's
it.
right.
It can only flow one
way.
direction, from industry to the government.
And the other good thing about the CRADAs, I think, as well, is even though it takes a little bit of time to get them set up, if you do the planning as they're being set up, like if you actually feel like you have the good framework, then you're ready to go once the CRADA is actually signed off on.
What IoT application or solution will fundamentally change your agency or customer?
I'll start with that one. For us, we talk about devices. You hear me complaining about IT and all that today. But our event horizon, in the 20, 30-year time frame, is we're looking at 3D printing, where the engineering analysis is done for a problem, and the part is printed downrange. And I don't have to have spares. That's where we want to go. We want aircraft to pull up, and it's a self-service. The pilot pulls up, doesn't get out, and it cleans his windshield, does all those things that people do today, robotics. Right? The Navy kind of does that with some of their auto-fueling and things, and we're looking for that too. We want bench-stocked items, if you're familiar with that, in warehouses, to where the little, I call it Roomba, but it's the little vacuum-like thing. The guy comes in, and he's already sent his request, and the bins come to the door, and he just grabs the part and he leaves, right? And that's it. And today, you go warehousing, somebody has to pick it and find it. We're looking for that level of automation to those things we do, and a lot of that's driven from a big data perspective. As the aircrafts are downloading petabytes of data, it's telling us what's broke, what needs to be fixed, and sending that data, the engineering, sustaining types of things, to the right places so they can create what the repair person needs. I mean, that's in our event horizon. We want robotics to the most maximum extent that we can get, because we're just not going to have people. There just aren't going to be enough people in the military as we go forward, at least in the Air Force, in the sustaining side, the logistics side. We're constantly under pressure to be more efficient. And we see in that further out horizon that you have a logistics person with drones delivering parts, where today you have the convoys that get blown up as they're trying to deliver supplies. We see a space out there where maybe we have a one pallet drone. I've said this about 4 times. I'm hoping it catches on. But we have this one pallet drone that the logistic guy picks up, takes it 300 miles that way, drops it, picks up whatever needs to be fixed, and brings it back out of harm's way. And I never drive a truck that way. And I don't have a set of cops in front to defend him, and 4 or 5 people with guns, and 4 or 5 people behind him to all get blown up and be targets. We just fly a drone. If the drone gets blown up, we get another. So in that environment, if you could imagine, that could be thousands of drones at a theater. And that's where we want to go. And he's over here going, oh my God, they're crazy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
fine.
that drives a lot of data flying around out there in that open space.
I mean, same with, the other big thing is the installation management. It's supposed to be going green and everything else. Well, there's no way of monitoring everything that's out there, as well as the bases, as well as electricity, as well as the data centers, as well as everything else. So as You can't even monitor, how much garbage is in the cans, so you don't have to pick it up. This is the issue of when you get to a smart base at some point in time that, it's going to save money because it's going to save airmen or whatever, contractors from doing more work than they have to do, just because of the way that, he's supporting it. So, that's going to be something that's going to be a cost savings across the board too, besides all the logistics stuff. And then you have the fitness stuff, which is the other piece.
Yes. And we're looking at drones to fly over the aircraft to do damage assessments and things. Where I don't need to send a mechanic out there. I don't have to put somebody in harm's way to do those assessments. And the CE folks do battle damage assessments on the buildings. It doesn't take a long stretch to figure out how to use this IoT across our whole domain. We keep people safe. We use less people. We can control those from a far distance and still do the same work. Today, it's eyes on, somebody touches things. In our future state, we don't see that. But we also admit in today's problems, we're not thinking that way. And part of where I work now is I'm transitioning from the CIO office over to our weapons system sustainment. And one of the tasks I have is in 3 FIDAPs, 15 years, how do we put the right requirements out here to ensure when the technology that we think is out 20 years comes this way, we have put budgets and defended budgets to be able to pay for it. And so try having that conversation with somebody that's focused on today. We're going to have this one pallet drone. I keep talking about it. It'll take off. And we're going to fly it ourselves. We don't need a pilot.
Why don't you just have the automated truck? It'd be a lot easier.
Well, because I don't want to drive it.
We don't. It's automated. It drives itself.
I have one in my office here in DC. Come on over. I've got a drone here. Well, she an Amazon.
It has to be one pallet.
One pallet.
One pallet.
Yeah, I believe that wraps up our panel, actually. Ms. Carlson, Mr. Guerreri, Mr. Carey, and Mr. Konieczki, we really appreciate your guys' insights into everything that you've talked about the Internet of Things. We didn't get a whole lot into robotics, and we did have a couple of questions that were left, so we'll follow up with those questions as well.
I want to thank you, and I want to tell everybody, Sri Alapuru is our expert in IoT. If anybody has any questions about Amazon's IoT on the side, we're happy to answer them. So, thank you.
Okay, with that,
Thanks, guys.
let's go.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks, panel. So now I want to introduce a 45-minute break. But first, I wanted to remind everybody get their passports stamped, if they could. Some great prizes out there. And I also wanted to just say a word about our sponsor, Perion, who's right outside, so you can get to them easy. So we're going to take a break for 45 minutes. And we're going to continue at 2:30 p.m. and we'll start the show again. So thanks. Sure.